Well, today what I'll be discussing with you guys is the whole notion of white autochthony. This concept sort of comes into my work through my doctoral dissertation. Now, I'm interested in the idea of white autochthony in relation to race-based inequalities in South Africa. Now, normally, when we discuss race-based inequalities in South Africa, we often think of white South Africans and whatever identities that they occupy. But this idea of white autochthony allows us, or rather prompts us to think about the idea of who owns South Africa. And the idea or the notion of autochthony is the idea that the first inhabitants of a place are its rightful owners. Now, if we think about this psychologically, this concept is very important because it helps us understand, or rather what comes from it is this idea that the first inhabitants who own a property therefore have the right to do whatever they want with that property. So they've got the right to determine whether we have equality or not because you're sitting at their table. So my whole work really focuses on white autochthony, and I argue that drawing from South Africa's history of settler colonial conquest, white South Africans experience themselves or have constructed a sense of ownership of South Africa. In other words, white South Africans, if we look at settler colonial conquest, have made themselves out to be first inhabitants in South Africa. And in my work, I try to bring in three key mythologies that they used during settler colonial times that really bring this idea of white autochthony to the fore. The first idea that I bring to the fore is the idea of vacant land theory, or the mythology of a vacant land theory. Now, white South Africans as settlers at different periods, right? There was the Dutch and then there was the English, who came at different periods, sort of constructed this idea that the land was vacant. Now, what that means is that if land is vacant, you can then take ownership of land, right? And you can own land and it can become your entity. So this is one of the things that I'm interested in, is this idea of a vacant South Africa, a terra nullius, and what this means for current ideas around who owns South Africa. A second, yet very important one related, is the idea of the Bantu migration, right? And this mythology is also very interesting because it often gets brought up when black South Africans make claims to land, that no, black South Africans also migrated around the same time that white settler colonials came to South Africa. So this idea then means that actually South Africa belongs to no one, right? Because we all came at the same time. Therefore, the land that you claim as your own is actually not yours, right? It's probably shared, or it is ours. And then the third, and I think this is very common amongst Afrikaner nationalists, is the idea of the Israelite myth, right? The idea that the Afrikaners were also chosen by God to be in South Africa. And this idea of being, or rather this idea of being chosen by God, makes them natural holders, or people who look after this place called South Africa. And I argue in my thesis that these mythologies somewhat play themselves out even in what we call post-apartheid South Africa, and they reinforce race-based inequalities, because white South Africans have nothing to negotiate with a people that do not own anything. And when they feel they own South Africa as well, then we've got nothing to negotiate. And if we think about it in practical terms, if you go to France, France is owned by the French. If you go to England, England is owned by the English, sorry. And they dictate the terms of who lives there, the laws that are there, who is equal, whether they will be equal with people. And this becomes fundamental for negotiating any form of equality between groups. So this is my work, yeah.